Pretty much. Good. Well, let me start. I mean, I really am always nervous when I'm asked to speak about this because I've been in Iceland less than 2 years. I've been employed as a teacher less than 2 years, after doing things, other things the rest of my life. And something that you couldn't know beforehand, but this is a personal story that everyone else in my family have been teachers. My parents, my brother, my sister, my brother's wife, my cousins. And when I was quite young, I guess I was 11 or 12, my father told me, you should never try to be a teacher. You have completely the wrong temperament. You're impatient, you're bossy, you're interested in learning, not in teaching. You can't fix your attention on anything. Just don't go into teaching. And of course, I felt very upset. And I had to become a diplomat instead, which in the view of my family was very much second best. And after doing that for 30 years and earning some money, I thought, well, you know, let's try and see if he was right or if he was wrong. Nobody was more surprised than me to get some good results, and I'm still always surprised when the students actually appear to have learned something from me. I mean, this is absolutely amazing. And the way I explain it to myself a bit is that actually teaching is life. I mean, teaching is not a separate art. Everyone in their life has taught something or somebody, because all it is about is communicating knowledge, techniques, skills. Encouraging people is a form of teaching. Empowering them, reassuring them is a form of teaching. And all of us have done this, even if it's just teaching children how to hold a spoon, or when they're a bit older, teaching them how to cook something, or how to knit something, or how to behave politely towards people. Or if you give a media interview, you are teaching public opinion. You have to think of the right words to do it. So to some extent, it's more like narrowing down and applying this general human skill to a specific experience, the classroom experience, which is, of course, structured. It has limits, it has particular requirements, and we therefore have to think about it more systematically. Now, all of us are over a certain level of intelligence, otherwise we wouldn't be here, and I have become more and more convinced that above a certain level of intelligence, everyone can be a good teacher. They would all be good teachers in different ways, because the starting point, and it's just as true of being a good diplomat or a good journalist, is know your strengths and weaknesses. Know where you're strong, where you're weak. If you're a good talker, talk. If you're not a great talker, but you can express things beautifully on tables and diagrams, use more tables and diagrams. I mean, there is nobody up there saying that only one method is correct. And I think even the teaching centre of the university are not saying only one method is correct. What they are saying is there are certain standards, there are certain norms, there are certain ethical rules that you must follow. I mean, let's not forget that, you know, not discriminating among students, not exploiting the students. There are certain results that we want to get in terms of standards, also that we can cooperate with international universities and be respected by them. In the end, how you get those results is up to you. What the teaching centre can offer, what I can offer today on behalf of my whole faculty, is some instruments, or you can think of them as tricks, if you like, shortcuts, which are available. And you use them or don't use them according to the subject you're teaching, the level of your students, but also your own strengths and weaknesses. And nobody is saying that you have to choose certain ones rather than others. It's more like choosing your clothing. As long as you look nice, you're not indecent. You have infinite range of choice in your clothing. And I think your detailed teaching method should be as personal as that. And so when we decided in the Faculty of Political Science, under the leadership of Gunnar Helgi Kristinsson, whom I'm sure many of you know, that we would do a teaching initiative, we would try and share our ideas and improve our standard of teaching, we immediately got this idea of the toolkit or the toolbox, because it conveys this idea of choice. You take up the tool that fits the job, and you take up the tool that fits your hand. And he asked me if I would be the person who collected the ideas or the tools to go into the box. And how did I do it? Well, before I started teaching here, I read a couple of books about what to do, and one of them was written by an American college teacher, and that is the one that stuck in my mind. It was amazingly good. It came to me in an illegal photocopy, all dirty and torn. But the main thing that this woman said, because it was a woman, is make the students do as much as possible. Because the students are young and innocent. And if you put more roles, tasks onto them, they may think that you're doing them a favour. They may think that you're a good democratic teacher. But what you're actually doing is sharing the burden in a very effective way and having a broader range of ways to judge the students, and etc., etc. And her advice was just push this as far as it goes. Push it as far as letting them set their own exam questions, which I'll come back to later. Now, I mean, that may be extreme, it may be not applicable in some courses, but I think the general spirit that you're a good teacher if you do less and make them do more, I think that was perhaps the single most important principle that I could have come here with as a starting point. I have, of course, also been able to attend some classes and courses. There was a very good one on evaluation in my first term here, which taught me a lot. Of course, probably the single most important thing for me was being able to go around in my faculty, and indeed not only in my own faculty, to people who were experienced, good teachers, teachers who cared about what they were doing, and just say, okay, how do you do it? What has worked and what doesn't work for you? And they gave me an enormous number of good ideas. Some of them I didn't want to follow myself, but I could say, okay, this belongs in the toolbox because I can see that it will appeal to other people. And finally, I'm only in my fourth term of teaching, so I haven't had a lot of time to experiment, but I can tell you that I have certainly done things that worked badly in this time, and I have done other things that worked better, and I have tried to be scientific. I mean, it's very hard to be scientific about one's own teaching because it is very personal, but I have tried to stand back and say, okay, why didn't this work? What could I do to improve it? And as I will also explain later, I have used some formal feedback techniques to find out how the students themselves were experiencing it, because in the end, that's a pretty important question. So this is how the toolkit was put together. Now, I have got just one copy of it here. There's no way I can talk through it. It's much too long, but I have emailed that to you all this morning. It's a free document. Our faculty is not charging a price for it, although we did joke about that at one stage. What I want really is to run through it and show you the structure of the overall concept, and then some specific examples, and the sheets that I've handed out today are also examples of tricks and techniques that I've used in my own teaching.
Can I?
Of course.
What you told that you had emailed to the group?
Yes.
I will email it to you tomorrow.
I was so late.
Yes, I copied it to Peter, so if you can take it from his box and pass it on to anyone who was late. What you will get there is my, my slides from today, the toolbox, and a couple of more lengthy documents showing methods that I have used in my course. One of them is a special paper that I produced on evaluation in my last course, which may be of interest. Anyway, there seems to be a tendency of the human mind to divide things into threes, so we divided the toolkit in this way: organization, which we can also call preparation, presentation, and evaluation. They more or less run through from the weeks before a course to what you do during the course to what you do at the end of the course, but I hope it's obvious that they are also a loop, because being able to evaluate successfully depends on knowing what you're evaluating, and that depends on the preparation and how you defined the aims of the course. Equally, when you've finished one course and evaluated what did the students learn, what did they not learn, there should be some feedback from that to the next time that you teach the course. If it went 100% perfectly, just take a holiday, don't worry about it. But that has never happened to me yet. And every time I've repeated a course, I have had to make changes because of my experience of the previous time. Now, the organisation is really about planning before the term and letting the students know just the fact that there is a plan, that you yourself will obey the plan just as they will obey the plan, is part of the trust that we need to establish with the student at the beginning. If the teacher is not disciplined, the student will not be disciplined either. I mean, this is quite obvious. So even if you make your plan for the course and have to change it 4 times, as long as you let the students know that you're changing and why you've changed, that's not the problem at all. It's just the idea that there should be something systematic about this, there should be purpose, and once we've committed ourselves, I've committed myself to teach, the student has committed herself or himself to learn, we're going to go through with that. So this early phase is really important. The course program, which you should issue to the students at least a couple of weeks before the course, even earlier if you have an early draft and it's not finalised, there's no harm in putting that on IGLA. The course programme I find a very important document for myself. It's the main discipline that I impose upon myself, and I put as much as possible into the course programme. Because the course programme is the way of knowing, letting the students know what will happen on the course. I mean, just in the simple sense of what room do they have to come to, what subject will be covered week by week, but also telling them why. And they may have signed up to the course with not an awful lot of thought. Maybe they didn't have a lot of choice. For instance, a lot of foreign students come on my course because they can only really understand ones in English. So they probably haven't thought very deeply what is the purpose of the course. And the course programme is the first document where you tell them. You should tell them what the expected learning outcome is. You know that there's a more formal procedure now in the university from this term onwards, that you have to spell out what will be the state of the student at the end of the course. What will they have learned? What will they have practiced? How will they have progressed? Another big question is, how will this contribute to their degree programme overall? And that may require you to talk a little bit to some of the other teachers teaching the main courses within that programme to see, are you perhaps going over the ground that one of them has already gone over but at a higher level, or are you fitting into another area? It's surprising how these simple questions are often not discussed within faculties. I mean, our faculty is not perfect by any means from that point of view. So these are the macro questions about the purpose of the course. But I think the micro question is also important, and that's what I would call course design. I mean, you probably set off with an idea of what is the total amount of stuff that you want to teach in the course. But it is worth stopping and thinking about in what sequence, in what structure are you going to teach it. If you just basically got a set book and you're going through it chapter by chapter, it might take you about 10 seconds to answer that question. But I have a course that I'm teaching now, which I'm actually quite struggling with. It's a BA course called Changing Security Challenges in a Globalized World. And it reminds me of that book title, Life, the Universe and Everything, because, you know, technically I can teach everything and nothing in this course. And I don't think I found the perfect answer either, but I had to say to myself, okay, well, perhaps we'll start with a session on what globalization is, perhaps we'll start with a session checking what do they think security challenges are, and then we've chosen to go through some substantial challenges like terrorism, poverty, whatever, and at the end come to institutional solutions. Now, I'm not saying it took me much more than 10 seconds to decide on that either, because that's a fairly logical sequence, but you can imagine if I was teaching terrorism, then the European Union, then going back to poverty, then doing NATO, then perhaps, oh my God, I should talk about international law, the course would be even harder for the students than it is. So it is really worth thinking about the logic of the sequence. Of course, you then have to decide how much detail to put in the programme about the sessions that you're going to have. I put in as much as possible, and again, if I change my plans, I tell the students I've changed my plans. No big deal. I am quite careful about the reading lists that I give. For my subjects, they're always quite long. And I know that the students will not have the patience to go to the library, particularly if there's only one copy of the book and 30 of them looking for it. So in practice, I tend to give them more online sources, or I tend to scan things and put them in Ookla. Now, the requirements for your course may be totally different. I would just say, ask yourself the question. If you want the students to read the stuff, it has to be relevant, it has to be readable, and it has to be easy for them to get. If it's hard for them to get, only the keen ones will get it. This much is obvious. I have also been in the habit of inviting guest speakers for most of my courses. I've taken advantage of some academics that I knew were coming here for other purposes, like to give lectures at institutes, or officials who are coming, and bring them into my class and use them. I never use a guest speaker for more than the first half of the presentation. They have basically the first hour. I insist on working with the students under my leadership for the second hour to make sure that they've absorbed what they've heard from the guest, and if by any chance the guest got it wrong, I can in a more or less subtle way pull the topic back and fit it back into the logic of the course again. This has worked very well indeed, and on the whole, the more guest speakers I've had, the better the courses have gone, which also suggests that it's perhaps not only my own teaching skills that are getting a high mark from the students. I have to be realistic about this. Presentation, I'm sure you know more about this than I do, and I'm really just going to touch on a couple of points here. I think the first session is terribly important, particularly if you're a teacher who has not met those particular students before. And if they're in the first year of their BA or MA, one should try even harder, because they will be even more confused and nervous. I have developed a technique that I'm quite comfortable with of how I present the first week to them. I have a thing I call a welcome PowerPoint, and this is one of the files that I've circulated to you. And I use it to lay down basic rules of behaviour. I use it to tell them about the course aims, the evaluation, how I'm going to divide the time. And if I promise that we will always start 5 minutes late and we will always have a 15-minute break, I make sure that we stick to that to the minute. Because again, with young people, just like babies, giving them very firm discipline setting is important to free the mind so that they can then focus on the substance. And I tell them my strengths and weaknesses as a teacher. I tell them what can you expect and what can you not expect. I tell them what's difficult about what we're trying to do in the course. I mean, this is an impossible subject. We're not going to be able to cover it fully. I tell them whether I'm expecting them to learn facts, or if not, what else am I expecting them to learn? And usually what I'm trying to make them learn is about, in my case in political science, historical processes, dynamics, alternative concepts, differences of opinion and debates, and how can you assess and evaluate different theories, different points of view, and how can you develop your own judgment. To me, that is all important. How to use the session time options for making students share the work. No, sorry, I have one more thing before I come to this. One more thing I do in the first session of every course is to hand out some kind of form for them to fill in. Most obviously, it's just to find out their names and the countries they come from, because I don't know how it is with you, but I always get Erasmus students turning up at the last minute who have not been enrolled. I haven't got the faintest idea what countries they come from. They can be quite exotic, and just getting the names clear and the identities clear to start with is very important. But I also give them a kind of questionnaire, and you do have an example of this on a sheet here. It's the one that's, just have a look and see what it is. Yeah, it's this one, course introduction form. And there, I've listed the main substantial topics that we're doing in the BA course. I've listed the main sessions that we're going to have on solutions or governance approaches. And I ask them, what do you find interesting and what do you find important? Now, first of all, just getting them to answer that question is saying to them, I'm going to ask you to be critical about your own ideas in this course, because they have to start by saying, what I like may not be what's important. And it's a little signal that I give to them right at the beginning. But secondly, I do genuinely want to know, particularly if one of these subjects ends up with almost nobody interested in it. I'm not going to take it off the course programme, but I am going to consider a way of perhaps twisting it and presenting it slightly differently. If it comes late in the course, I've got time to adjust my preparations, and I know I'll have to try extra hard to spoon feed the students on that, to help them with the information, to make it exciting, to design a game that they can play on this subject, for example. To give you a very specific example, in my European Security Institutions course, we have to talk about the Council of Europe. Now, I know nothing about the Council of Europe. My presentation is based on Wikipedia. The students haven't even bothered to look at Wikipedia, and they think the Council of Europe is out of date and not interesting. Partly I try to show them that it is interesting by showing how the Council of Europe has exposed some Western scandals, like the secret CIA flights which were taking prisoners, you know, backwards and forwards to Guantanamo Bay. It was the Council of Europe Assembly that exposed that. But knowing that I can't really make them listen for more than 50 minutes on the Council of Europe, the second hour is devoted to a debate on democracy and security. And that is, in fact, the issue raised by the Council of Europe. How do good democratic and ethical standards, which that institution tries to defend, how does that help Europe to be secure and stable? So I make them argue, why is security bad for democracy? Why is democracy bad for security? I mean, quite cool if you're a young person. I would never say, why is democracy good for security? That's boring. And actually, this ends up being a very good session. So, you know, think beforehand and preferably even ask the students which are the bits that they're looking forward and not looking forward to. And usually the students' opinions are the same as my opinion, actually. And then we just find a way to get together through the difficult bits. The other thing that I try to do in all my courses is divide the time more or less half and half. The first half is me presenting something to the kids, or the guest lecture presenting something. Then we have a break, and in the second half we have some kind of interactive work. Now, in the toolkit you will see a vast number of ideas for how you can do things other than just talk to the students. Because in simple terms, this is what we're looking for here. This will differ enormously from subject to subject. I know with some of the subjects the students will be on their computers working along with you all the way. The issue just won't arise in that form. But I think in all social sciences it arises in that form. And then you have an almost infinite range of things that you can do. You can ask groups of students to prepare presentations beforehand and come and competitively give those presentations in the second half and comment on them to each other. I use that quite a lot in one of my courses. Another thing I do in my course on non-state actors and non-military emergencies is a scenario exercise. You know, there's going to be a major volcanic eruption here in Iceland, and which different aspects of security will it affect, and who has the responsibility to deal with them, and what can go wrong. I mean, that's quite a cool exercise anyway. It's close to reality, but it will teach them a lot about the subject of that week, which is infrastructure security. The students haven't had to prepare for that, but they are doing the hard work in that part, because all I had to do is ask the questions. Now, you can ask the students to spend part of the session without you doing anything, them just working in little groups talking to each other, and then feeding back the results in some way. That's getting even closer to the advice of this American lady. You know, if you can get through a large part of your session without having to talk, that's a victory in her terms. You know, as long as you know that the students understand what's being done and it is helping them in some way. Now, I won't go into all the variations because they're there in the toolkit, and probably there are even more. But just to say that my experience is that this is not an artificial thing, that it really does help. And more than anything, I think it's what helps those students who are a bit shy and slow to begin with. Now, it's not necessarily because they're the ones speaking up in these exercises, but it's because they feel some responsibility as part of the student group, and often they will pay more attention to what another student is saying than to what the teacher is saying. And for those who are speaking up, we all know that you remember something that you've spoken better than something that you've heard. And when I'm looking at exam results, I find that the students really have remembered more of the factual material that we covered in exercises than the factual material that I covered in my lectures, however brilliant those lectures might be. And certainly much more than the set book, which they seem to be brilliant at forgetting. One of the other handouts I've given you is the result of an assessment I did last term in my course on European security institutions. Let me just see what the heading is on it. It's Mid-Term Teaching Quality Check Anonymous Questionnaire. It's a stapled document. And I discussed this with the Teaching Centre and with Gunnar Helgi. Last term was the first time that I'd done this. And about halfway through the term, I gave them a questionnaire to fill in. I gave them a half-hour coffee break and said, fill it in, give it back to me. So, of course, not all the students got to fill it in, just the ones who were there this week. And you will see from the paper the kind of questions I asked them. And perhaps the most important ones were the last questions. Is there something you would like me to do more of? And is there something you would like me to do less of? And what you have here is the sheet where I filled in the results. There are several interesting things about this. There were things that surprised me when I got it back. Although the overall evaluation was high, and that was reassuring, there were some people who were consistently giving a 4 or even a 5, where the range is from 1 to 5. And it's clear what the phenomenon is there, that there are always a few students who are just not going with the flow. And because this was anonymous, I didn't know, are they lazy? Do they not like me personally? Do they not like the philosophy that I'm putting across? Or have their parents' marriage just broken up? Or what is it? And because it was anonymous, I couldn't really inquire into that. And it was quite difficult to think, well, what am I going to do with this? Because I can see that I'm doing the right thing for most of the students, but I don't like it if I have to leave a few behind. Also, I must say I was quite annoyed by some of the results. I thought that some of their comments were a bit flippant, and how could they say, we don't want you to put the stuff on UGLA? Well, I realised actually a lot of students hate UGLA and don't understand it. And one of the things I've learned from this is that now when I introduce my courses, I have a separate slide saying UGLA, love it or hate it, but this is what we're going to use. And this is how I interpret werkefni, and this is how I interpret, you know, naamsefni and so on. I've realised that we can't take UGLA for granted. So that I have learned from a stupid comment on this questionnaire. And what I did the following week, after giving them all these results, by the way, is to say, look, some of the things you've asked for, you're not going to get. I'm not going to simplify this course. I'm not going to speak more slowly. You signed up for this as an MA course in English. It's still time for you to get out of this course if you can't meet that standard. I'm not going to stop putting stuff in UGLA because the university is telling me put stuff in UGLA, and that works for me. I don't see how else we can do it. Then when they're all thinking, oh my God, you know, she's tougher than we thought she was. But then I said, look, you know, here are 12 things that I can do. You know, picking up ideas from the questionnaire that are going to give you more of the things that you like, make it nicer for both of us. And I can tell you that for the rest of the course, I didn't have discontented people, and nobody left the course. So somehow those few people who were not with it somehow got more with it. It could have been just because of the gesture that I was making. Do you see what I mean? And I will never know. But if we look at it scientifically, the probability is that just the fact of doing this survey had made an impact on some of the students. Or possibly it was the discussions they'd had together about how to respond or whatever. Yeah.
We have found a side effect of putting a
Yeah.
survey in the midterm.
Mm-hmm.
The students will be more satisfied.
You have found.
It's a joyful side effect.
And I would add that, of course, the Teaching Centre can do it for you. I designed it myself to fit my particular course and my particular method of teaching, and you could do that too. But you can also get a more formal evaluation done using a standard method by the teaching centre. And you can agree with them on how to use the results, right? So you have several options here. Quickly, I'll have to go through evaluation. The main thing I've learned about this is that, again, there is no right and wrong way. I think what the university is signalling to you is that you should not automatically just use written exams, that those of you who have used written exams, but you should ask yourself the question, what is it you're trying to test, and what then is the best method to test it? As long as you're asking yourself that question, you'll probably come up with the right answer. What I have learned in my courses so far is that the students, if there's anything they can possibly misunderstand and forget on this particular point, they will misunderstand and forget it more than once. And I was amazed when I did my midterm check that after all the trouble I'd taken to tell them, you know, the essay instructions and how much points they would get for what, they still were not sure. And I think this what tells us is that this is a very nervous and important point for them. And sometimes you just have to repeat it, you just have to be patient. And so for one of my courses where they were particularly confused, I just gave them like 3 or 4 pages where I spun it out into as much detail as I could what they would be evaluated on. And from my point of view, it was useless. I mean, it was repetitive, but apparently it made them feel better. Apparently it was a comfort blanket, and we got better results in the final exam. The other things that I've tried to do as innovations are when I mark their essays, and I always make sure that they come in before the end of term. This is where I give 50% of the credits on an essay and 50% on an exam. I send them an individual feedback form, and I've also given you an example of this. It's essay evaluation. And of course, it's a lot of work for me. You'll see that it's laid out in basically positive ways. There isn't a heading saying, these are the stupid mistakes you made, you fool. All the headings are laid out in a positive way, but it is a way of tactfully drawing attention to their strengths and weaknesses. And again, my experience is that where people have got low marks for the essays and had this feedback, they improved by, say, 0.5 or perhaps a whole grade in the final exam because they knew what to look for. I mean, students are quite rational animals in a way. You know, if you give them a certain stimulus, they will respond. And I am experimenting at the moment in the BA course with having more occasions for evaluation during the term and giving them even more elaborate feedback on their strengths and weaknesses. And so far I've found that this is a good way of spending my time. It's very important for them to know when they will get their marks. I'm sure all of you are wonderful about marking quickly and giving them their marks quickly. It is the hardest thing to do. I hate it. I mean, I feel very uncertain about the actual grading a lot of the time, and it takes a lot of time and it's exhausting. But they are just so grateful if they get it quickly. This is another very, very simple thing, because it shows them that you care and you have taken on that boring labour to help them know the results quickly, not just so that they can feel good or feel bad, but they have to make choices about what are they going to do the next year, what jobs are they going to apply for. So it really is important if you can do it quickly. Last summer I did it the same day for both my courses. And, you know, perhaps there's a legend going around on that. It wasn't too difficult. I had about 25 per class. But it was so worth it for the attitude of those students who, you know, came back and did other classes with me. Was really worthwhile. The other thing I do is I give them a chance to discuss the exam structure. Now, within limits. You know, I say to them, for my own purpose, there are certain things that the exam has to do. There are other points on which I have genuinely not made up my mind. Let's talk about it in class, and at the end we'll take a democratic vote. Because not all kinds of exams suit all kinds of people. Some are very good at writing essay-type short answers. Some would prefer to have more factual, multiple choice, or an answer to a short question. It's a gender difference to some extent, by the way. And you never know with a given class what the balance of preference will be, and that's why I don't mind changing from term to term, as long as they know what we're doing and why we're doing. And they, as I say, they have a vote on it. so that has turned out to be useful. I think this is my last slide. I did say that this whole process was a feedback loop, but just to hammer this home, the work that you do before the beginning of the term and perhaps later if you're updating your course program is worth its weight in gold, because if you're prepared well, it's easier for you to sail through the term. You yourself will be more confident, you will get better results, but you will put the least effort into it because all that planning effort has been done up front. You can forget about that. The good presentation, I mean, I won't say that it makes the students happier. That's possibly not what we're here for. What we're here for is to make them learn more. And in my experience, experimenting with these different ways of presentation, some feedback, some sense of control for the students, it lets them learn more. And I have put more and more of the burden onto the students themselves with some success. And good evaluation is very important because everybody needs that moment of achievement. I mean, you know, even if a student has given great answers in every session and they know the teacher likes them, there's nothing like getting that final 8.5 and whatever it may be, and being able to show your parents and your girlfriend and so on. So it is important to be able to pin down the level of attainment and, if possible, do it in a way that has more feedback, more evaluation for the students and lessons that bring you round next term. And I'm mainly concerned, am I going to get through the term in one piece? Are my students going to come through all right? But it does appear that if you get this right, the university will also be happy. The university will have a better opinion of your faculty. When there is money being handed out, you will not get the least of the money. So these things are not only to be done for idealistic reasons, but I think there is recognition for good teaching, and the system is being all the time refined to give more and more recognition and more definition of good teaching. That's really all I can tell you, but I have time for some remarks and questions if you have any. And my warm thanks to all those who have helped me in this, also from the Teaching Centre and other faculties. Oh, by the way, there is one of the handouts that I didn't mention to you. I'm sorry I forgot that. It's an institutional comparison. It's institution strengths and weaknesses in security mode. There was another point I was going to make, which this refers to, which is if you have courses, as I have, with extremely complicated subject matter, think of the poor students when they come to revise. Are they just going to have all this information scattered all over the place, or do they have some paths or some structural ideas to lead them through it? So I try to incorporate in all my courses elements of comparison, where they can sort of put into boxes the facts that they've learned. And even if we know that the exercise of putting things in boxes is oversimplistic, I do think it helps them mentally to realize that everything is related. And this is an example from my course on European security institutions, because you see I've put I handed this out at the end of term. We have the four main institutions that we talked about: EU, NATO, OSCE and Council of Europe. I've asked the students to grade them on a number of good features. And we did this as an exercise in the next to last session, where I invited over an academic from Ireland who is the author of the set book. And I deliberately chose a newly published set book by a young academic because he's a very charismatic guy. And they were so excited. Oh my God, will you sign the set book for us? You know, and this guy is not, you know, I mean, he's a great academic. He's not a world-famous name, but it meant a lot to the students to see him. And I had asked him beforehand to fill in his answers on this grid. So we got the students to discuss the answers in the session and to write down their own answers on their own copies. And then I said to them, these are Andrew's answers. Go home and see if you agree with him or not. And if not, why not? So this didn't take me very much work to do, but if you take that session as a whole, it was involving the students in a complex kind of way. And if I was them, I would have loved to have something like this to look at as my revision before I had to write the exam questions on comparisons between the institutions. And I have found in every course I've done that at some point I can offer them a structure like this to cover at least part of the complexities we've covered. But of course I don't know if that's relevant to your own topics, your own teaching topics. Yeah.
Thank you for very interesting lectures. Many good advices. I am reflecting on this form here, midterm questionnaire.
Yes.
That you are.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking, isn't it difficult, or what can you actually do when the term is, you're in the midst of the term?
Yeah.
Asking the students and getting their opinions and their asking for or stating that they are not pleased with the course material, or you know what I mean.
Is this it? Thank you.
Anything.
Well, first of all, I would say you should not do too much. I know that we're all inclined to be self-critical, but when you get negative answers, you should first say what is wrong with the student, not what is wrong with me, particularly if you have most of the students satisfied and a small number unsatisfied. It's quite logical to say that it must something be wrong with the student. So you may not want to change what you're doing, but you may want to change something about difficulties that individual students are having. And there may be discrete ways that you can guess which they are and work out what the problems are for observing them in group work. So this is the first answer, that perhaps you don't need to change anything, but you need to give a little bit of extra help and attention to some of the class. The second thing is that, where are we? If we take the second page of this, one of the things that the students wanted less of was abbreviations and acronyms and EU institutional jargon. Now that really came as a lesson to me, because I'd assume that everybody knows what the European Commission is, or if I say the ECJ, or I say JHA has turned into JFS, everybody knows what I'm talking about. Well, I guess a lot of you don't know what I'm talking about, and you're highly qualified teachers. I'd been making the wrong assumptions that an Icelandic class would know these European abbreviations. And of course they don't. So it's obvious what I should do, that in the rest of my presentations I wrote up on the board and I explained all the acronyms as we went through. Now, perhaps that might be the only thing I would change. But it was worth doing it, first of all, because the gesture satisfies the students, and secondly, even learning one thing was worth the very small time that we spent on it. They also indicated that they were more interested, I mean, this is an interesting thing, they were more interested in me telling stories about my personal experience and opinions. Now, why had I not done that? Because I was too modest. It didn't occur to me that they would be interested in my life history. But once they said, okay, we are interested in your life history, then in the remaining sessions, I could bring in personal stories, crises that I'd been involved in, which teaches something about the institutions, for instance. You know, and mutatis mutandis. I think any of you could find very specific lessons like this. You can use them in the second half of the term, but of course, the next time you teach the course, you do it from the beginning. So it's a rolling process.
Maybe it's also, and not least, the gesture that you are talking and listening to these students and
that's right.
Makes a difference for them.
I think it does. And of course, this gesture that I make at the start of the term, when I say, what are the aspects you're particularly interested in? And I give them the results of that, by the way. And normally I can say to them, yeah, well, you know, the 6 or 7 most popular aspects are indeed the ones I intend to focus on. One of you put down environmental security and I can't cover that, but I will have a word with you afterwards and tell you a good book to read. Well, then you made everybody happy, and that didn't cost very much. So the gesture is actually extremely important.
And there's always some good points in that, as you mentioned, that we could take immediately and do something about.
Yeah, I think there are. But again, you have to remember the first part of my story, when I told what I actually did, is that some of their suggestions, I said to them, I'm not going to do that. I'm not prepared to do it, and that would be wrong. And you can say that. And it's actually probably better if you say that about a few things. Because, of course, what this American woman said in her book is put as much as possible onto the students while keeping control. And even with students at this age, who are not little kids, keeping control can be an issue. And in your interest, so that you can function as a teacher, you must always do that first. So knowing when to say no is also really important. Other comments or questions? You know, I'm always a little concerned that you're teaching so many different things that perhaps a lot of my examples are not really relevant to, you know, perhaps some of the scientific disciplines. Or
I suppose many of your topics are very general
yeah.
and universal, but I'm sure that some of our experiences and some of our special what we have to fight with,
yeah.
that might be very different in
yeah.
Scandinavia
I
and
can
in the Nordic
imagine.
countries than in the States.
Yes, yeah. I think that's true. I mean, the States, in the States, children are taken through school with a lot of training in self-expression and debate.
Challenges,
and that,
word I'm sure.
yeah. And also they're willing to stand up and they're willing to discuss things without getting emotional, well, hopefully. And this kind of training is not so often offered in Nordic countries. Again, it's different in different parts of Britain and Europe. It is offered in Britain and France. But with pupils from the Nordic countries and even from Iceland, it is quite difficult sometimes to draw them into these more active roles. Because first of all, they're not absolutely sure that it's permitted, or perhaps other teachers don't permit it. You know, let's face this, because each teacher, even within the same faculty, may have a very different view on this. So it takes them a while to be sure that, yes, it's permitted. And by the way, one way that you can show that is that the first couple of students who speak up, even if they say something totally stupid, you praise them and you stroke them and you sort of turn around what they said so that it's something good, so that the other pupils really understand that this is permitted and that this will be rewarded. Then I think you just have to search for topics that they're really interested in. And because I don't know the Icelandic environment so well, I'm still having to learn what kind of topics turn them on. Of course, talking about Iceland itself turns them on. And it's worth thinking, is there some relevant or structured way that you can bring that into your session? It shouldn't be just political gossip or them letting off the emotions they have about the crisis, but maybe there is some angle that they can discuss in a rational way. That will always hold their attention. But then there are some things that you just, you don't expect. I mean, last week I had an exercise, we were talking about NGOs, non-governmental charities working in conflict countries, and I drew a map of an imaginary country called Tragistan, where a charity was carrying out a lot of relief operations. Well, that's 1,000,000 miles from the experience of the kids on that course. I shouldn't call them kids because it's an MA course. But they thought themselves into the position of that charity. And they told me in enormous detail all the things that could go wrong in working in different parts of the country. And you never know what's going to get through to their imagination, what's going to draw them out. So to some extent, you just have to experiment and accept that not every week is going to be a total success. Of course, it's also a problem I have in that some of my classes might have as many as 30% Erasmus students. And most of them are lively and are used to debating, and then the Icelandic students don't get a chance to speak. And then again, I might have to switch the topic a little bit and make more questions about Iceland itself, which only the Icelandic students can answer. This is one reason why you can never really teach the course the same way twice, because the dynamic of the group is so different. And if it's a large group, it takes quite a while for it to settle down and for you to work out what the dynamic is. And generally, in a course, I guess this is just common sense, but I tend to, well, the expression would be to backload the course. You know, I put more of the important material at the end and more of the demanding student exercises at the end, because I just know that the first few weeks we're settling down and all of us will probably make some mistakes. So that's something to take into account in the programming, of course. I mean, I think it's a challenge when you have one of these very diverse courses with very political subjects, but I also think how difficult it must be if you're giving a course on some extremely specific aspect, for example, of methodology, and there is one correct way of doing it. Maybe there is one textbook, and what you're doing is taking the students through the textbook. How the hell are you going to keep their attention? I think that's a harder task than the one that I have. And it's harder then to devise games and exercises and ways of offloading it on the students. So I think all courses are very difficult in their own way. Do you have any comments for us?
No, I don't.
So I'm not breaking the rules in any way. Or
Do you want to
No, I just have one final question.
Yes, of course.
You mentioned that you use Wikipedia and for preparing
For myself,
lecture.
yes, I do.
And well, I tell my students, don't use Wikipedia. You might use it when you use some other sources, but Wikipedia is
Well,
maybe not the best source you could
Well,
use.
I tell them not to use it. I shamelessly use it myself, but what I use it for is orientation, because it gives you the broad outline of a subject, but often their lists of secondary sources are very good.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, I can tell you specifically, yesterday I was writing a book chapter on European strategies, and I'd been asked to put in a paragraph about Sarkozy's Mediterranean initiative, which frankly I was completely uninterested in, knew nothing about. I went on Wikipedia. It had the full political story there. It wasn't very academic, but it said, you know, here is the URL for the summit declaration. Here is the URL for Sarkozy's invitation. Then, of course, I looked at that, and then I could form my own academic opinion. Now, if the students were secretly doing that as well, that would be fine. But I was not stupid enough to put Wikipedia in the footnote. And I think one of the things we should teach the students is whatever you do with Wikipedia in the privacy of your own home, never put it in a footnote. It's amazing how many people get through to even working in research institutes, and people haven't told them that, and they make fools of themselves. So sometimes a teacher doesn't have to be totally honest. And actually on EU topics, I find it's quite reliable. I don't know who's been writing it, but it is really pretty good. And the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which one of my students is writing her MA thesis on, when she went on Wikipedia and confessed it to me, because the first reference was a book I'd written. So she said, you can hardly object to that. So that was all right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity to talk. Thank you very much.